and then we can take it from there. Okay, so I would like to, I hope that today I will be well within the 3 hours, just 2 presentations, lectures 3 and 4. And hopefully it will all go very smoothly. And as usual, you can type in your questions in the chat box. I will try to respond, or you can turn on your microphone and talk if you want to. Yeah. So today will be about building up the foundations for a theory. It is not a theory itself yet. It's really the basic hypotheses of the theory, so to say. And we will do that in 2 lectures, essentially. In the first lecture, I will set out this theory, and in the second lecture today, second hour, I will try to make it work to analyze how we normally can increase our wealth, economic wealth, as it is called. Yeah. So let's start with a short summary of what we talked about so far last week. Namely, I equate economic wealth with use value. Now, use value is something complex. It is not that easy. You can have a whole debate about use value. What is it? But in essence, it comes down to a bundle or quantities of economic goods that are produced in the system, in the economy. And those have use value, those goods. How you measure exactly the total pie of use value, that is a whole debate by itself. So classical political economists of the 19th century kept it very vague of what exactly that was. They said, yeah, commodities have use value, and more or less that was it. When you go to Marx, for example, you can read that there in the Capital in the first chapter. But after the marginalist revolution, of course, they started to use utility functions to express use value. And of course, everybody's endowed with their own utility function, this subjectivism as it is called. But I today will also use utility functions, but in a slightly different way, namely as objective quantifiers of use value. So I reflect kind of social preferences that everybody has. And we can take it from there. Anyway, you will see that in action a little bit later and see how we use that. But I want you to think of a utility function as a kind of production function for use value in that regard, right? We will use it as such. All right, so the second thing that I introduced last time was that wealth is created in the social division of labor, and we will go to the foundations of that today. We go to the underlying principles why that is. And that social division of labor then imposes or creates an architecture in the economy. So that is what we will do. We will create an we will, from the social division of labor, there results an architecture, and we will take that up a little bit later. From next week onwards, we will talk mainly about the architecture and no longer the underlying social division of labor that much. And we look at the upper layer, so to say, of this wealth creation process. Anyway, so today I'm going to set up a theory of how we get to this social division of labor, what is necessary to go to this social division of labor. And we know then that there are only 2 species essentially currently in the world that have a social division of labor, and those are insects and humans. And insects, of course, it's a very biological social division of labor. You're born into a role, so to say. You're a worker bee, or you're a queen bee. But we know that ants and bees have very complex societies and create tremendous economic wealth. So a beehive and an ant hill or an ant colony, they create tremendous wealth like humans do. Now, the unique feature of humans is that we are flexible. We are able to respond to things. We modify our behavior. We modify our social division of labor in response to what is happening around us. And when a natural disaster hits, we respond to that and we make it work for us that we can do that. Yeah. Now, we need to take account of that in a proper theory. How do we do that? What is really underlying these things? And I will talk about that today very much. So the core is that human nature is founded on networking and social interaction. And we have evolved as such, you know, we are Homo dictus, as we can call that. And we have evolved as such. So our biological evolution went hand in hand with our social or socio-economic even evolution. We evolved as collaborators. Yeah? And that is important to take into account here, yeah? That we evolved as collaborators. We did not start collaboration at some point by agreeing to it. We really created this. Okay, so how do we do it? What is underlying our interaction? What do we? What is our main tool? And this is unique. This is uniquely human. We create fictional narratives. We tell each other stories, and we believe those stories. We fully believe those stories. Now, we live in a society that is extremely complex, and we tell each other all kinds of stories. And this past year, of course, this came very much to the fore with regard to Trump and the kind of rebellion that was created on the 6th of January by a group of people that occupied the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Now, this is based on a fictional narrative. And we say that's a false narrative. You know, the mainstream says this is a false narrative. However, we in the mainstream also believe very much in narratives, right? We use our bank cards every day to purchase stuff. That is a pure fiction. It's based on a multi-layer of fictions, so to say. Right? We first of all have something called a pound, and that is a monetary instrument, but it's a fiction. It does not really exist. Then we have banks. Those are complete fictions as well. And then finally we have cards, little plastic cards. We somehow show in the shop, and then some machine is reading that, and it sends some signals over an electric system, and then somehow we have paid. And then in this bank account of us, a number of pounds is deducted from our account. Now, this is layer upon layer of fiction, and we slowly over time built these fictions up. We first created money as a physical thing. It became, for example, coins, physical coins of gold and silver, and that over time evolved into a banking system, and it evolved into an electronic system only very, very, very recently. And it only evolved as a pure electronic system over the past year. The COVID crisis has created now a purely electronic monetary system, which is quite unique when you think about it. Yeah. So we do that. We do that every day, building fictions, believing fictions, and conflicting fictions leads to strife, and that is exactly what we have around us at the moment. Yeah. Anyway, fictions are extremely powerful because they can be used for the positive and can be used for the negative, right? So we use these fictions to build things. That's the positive thing. We built a whole economy based on these fictions. We started to tell each other stories, and we said, you know, we can trade with each other commodities, and we have to trust each other, and so we tell stories to support that trust. Yeah. And the main key to understand this positive effect of a fiction is that when we both believe the fiction totally, we can call that embeddedness. We have trust, and we trust each other through the fiction. If we both believe in the monetary system, the electronic monetary system, and the shop holder and I both believe it, then there's no problem. We can trade, and our trade is quite frictionless, as we can call that, compared to what it used to be. It is quite frictionless, and it is both. It is based completely on a very, very deep trust. More than ever in history, we trust in the fictions, we trust in the institutions that we have, because we are basing a global economy on it. It is no longer a local economy. It's not just the city in which we live. It is the whole world that is founded on these fictions. Are there any questions? Is it clear what I want to communicate? Type in your questions if you want to.
I have one.
Yeah.
Last week, at the end of last week, you spoke about platforms as well. Could you maybe explain again what platforms exactly are?
Okay, platforms is a feature of the current economic organization, the current infrastructure. And platforms is that these entities, these organizations, firms, control whole chunks of the infrastructure. So they control their supply chain, for example. So Tesco is a platform, and these banks, you know, HSBC is a platform. They all organize themselves as platforms. And nowadays, the government is even organizing itself as a platform. And the platform is based on outsourcing. And outsourcing provides control of the infrastructure. And the purpose of the control of the infrastructure is, of course, to reap tremendous benefits and profits. But this is a very advanced feature of the infrastructure. So all these elements that I talked about are fictions. HSBC is a fiction. It is a legal fiction, even in law. And the law itself is something that we commonly believe as something that guides our lives. But it is amazing when you think of it. Tesco is a legal fiction. The contracts that they use are legal fictions. All of this is legal fiction. And the legality of it is a fiction by itself. It is based on the nation state, which is also a fiction. So it is all founded in the same principle. And that principle is what I want to talk about today. I don't want to talk about this very advanced organizational form of the economy, which we will cover later in the semester when we go to network models. Yeah. So did I answer your question? I was very...
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, good. All right. Anybody else?
I had one question. So this idea of that we have created fiction around us, it is plausible when you think about modern society, but I'm struggling to understand how this would work in primitive societies. Like, how would they create fiction? I mean, how does it work there?
Oh, from the very basis of our evolution, right? Human evolution goes through many species of hominins, as we call them. And hominins are these species that are extinct, like Homo erectus and the Neanderthals and all those people. All of these hominins had in common that they were already building very complex societies because they were collaborating with each other. They were networking, and they evolved as networkers. They developed a voice box, and the voice box allowed us to talk to each other. Language is a fiction. So the most primitive things that we do together are fictions, right? When I express myself by using a word, like word, you know the meaning of that, and we have a common understanding of that. But word is a fiction. It's something that we, so fiction is a story, but it goes much deeper than just a story. It's really, really deep, okay? And that's what I mean with embeddedness. So our language is a fiction, that we live in a community. We cannot live in a community without communicating and have rituals. Rituals from very primitive societies were extremely important. And we still have very complex rituals, you know, writing a contract and signing it and shaking hands when you make deals. All of that are rituals. And rituals are fictions, and they support our interactions, so to say. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. All right. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to set up an axiomatic theory of how economic wealth is created based on these principles that I just mentioned, namely these fictions that our commonality is these fictions. We have built institutions, and we use these institutions to build a society, and that leads to that infrastructure. And what we see around us is that infrastructure, and we interact with the infrastructure, and we interact through the infrastructure. So what is an axiomatic theory? An axiomatic theory is one based on axioms or hypotheses that one by one we build up to have a full understanding of how this all functions. Yeah. So these axioms lead then to theorems or lemmas, as we call that. So it's a very precise logical theory, and the most logical expression of that is mathematics, but that is not what I will pursue here. I will not have a mathematical theory at all. We have a conceptual theory, a very philosophical theory. Yeah. So let's build that up, right? So hypothesis one is directly taken from biological evolution of the human being, so to say. Humans, how did they evolve? Well, there is what is called the social brain hypothesis, and there is the bounded rationality hypothesis that are at the foundation of this. So when you translate that in economics, which I do very much, I mean, this whole module is about economics. It is not about evolution. It is not about biology. It's not about sociology. It's economics. I translate all of this in economics. So our key concept is that of an economic agent. An economic agent is a representation of a human being as an economic decision maker. And we endow that human being with a social brain, as we call that, a networking ability. Right? However, that networking ability is bounded. You can have no unlimited abilities to network and to create networks, create societies, and so on. We are very much limited, and we have to rely on each other to do things. And that is the nature of a human being. Human being is a social being, and we rely on cooperation, on collaboration to solve problems and to get things done. Let me delve a little bit deeper on this. So let's delve into the social brain hypothesis then. It is directly related to the social organization that I talked about. And it evolved into a very large brain. Our heads are very large compared to other species. Even primates, even chimpanzees don't have such humongous heads as we have, because we have a very large brain. And this brain is the main instrument to network and to collaborate and to be flexible and to use tools also, of course. But we evolved as such. We also have a voice box. We have our eyes are different from other species because the whites in the eyes allow us to see how the other looks at things. And this is a way to communicate with each other. So when I look at somebody or look at a thing, others will see that. When you have a cat or a dog, you can only see where the head is directed to, not where the eyes are directed to. Yeah. So that is very important. All these things hang together. Now, what hangs together also is that our social functioning hangs together with that big brain, right? So the social functioning hangs together with the fact that we have to maintain our big brain. We need food, and we need a lot of food because the large brain requires a lot of calories to maintain it. So we need an economy to maintain ourselves. From the very first moment we evolved, there is no starting point really, we evolved over time. We became more and more social, and we became more and more economic together, right? We built an economy that evolved over time through the species, through the different species. Yeah. Secondly, the brain evolves very slowly, so we need a very long time for young members of the human race to grow up. We need to give young people 15, 20, 25 years, depending on the society, to become full members of that society. Yeah. And so we need to nurture them. And it takes a really long time. I mean, the human body grows very, very slowly compared to other animal species. So when you compare that to a cat, for example, a cat after half a year is fully developed and essentially an adult. And so there are many animal species like that. Yeah. So all of this requires an economy. Yeah. And so we need to feed ourselves. We need to raise the next generation. We need to survive. All of these elements can only be done through our human organizations, our human communities. This happens through our networking and our ability to do things together. Yeah. And we create mainly those very basic elements for survival and for development, and that is food, shelter, healthcare, right? And healthcare is an extremely social function of the community, right? The most social function, but also the other ones are social functions. So we are extremely deeply social, socio-economic, I should say. The economy hangs together with the survival of our species. Yeah. Let's delve a little bit deeper then. Right. So the social brain, what did I do? Did I repeat my slide? Anyway, together we solve big problems. Now, we do that through the social brain, right? Our networking ability, right? The social brain is an evolutionary biological term for networking ability, essentially. However, we are bounded in those abilities. And so these fictional narratives hang together with our bounded abilities. Without the boundedness of our abilities, we would not need fictional narratives. We would not build fictions. So if we all are all-knowing, for example, or we are clairvoyant, and we can directly communicate with others without using language, without any problem, without any obstruction, we don't need fictional narratives. We don't need a language when you can communicate thoughts to another human being. And it is our inability to do that very well that gives us our society. Yeah. So our limitations, right? I need so many words. I mean, I'm already talking for 20 minutes now, 25 minutes. And what I try is to communicate this idea of the fictional narrative as a role in the social brain, so to say. Now, that I am so inept is a human trait. And we use our fictions to overcome that. We overcome our bounds. Yeah. There are two consequences to that that you might know, have encountered maybe. The first one is Dunbar's number. Dunbar is an evolutionary theorist, essentially. He was the first to propose the social brain and to fully develop that theory that humans evolved socially as well as biologically at the same time. Dunbar's number refers to the limitation of our brain to remember the faces and the names of people. So we can only really know 150 other human beings because more our brain cannot contain. We pretend that we can do much more with Facebook and all that, but in reality, when we are face to face and you really need to rely on other people, need to communicate with them, then 150 is really the limit. And this is related to the size of our brain, essentially. The second aspect of this boundedness is Knightian uncertainty. Knight was an economist who introduced for the first time the notion of uncertainty. It's a very economic notion as a consequence. We cannot forecast what happens when we have an action. There are unforeseen consequences, right? Brexit is a wonderful example. When I was thinking of Brexit, I thought transaction costs would go up tremendously because all of these tools that the European Union creates fell away. And so we would face much higher costs to trade with each other. However, an unintended consequence that I did not forecast is that businesses just say, well, forget about it. I'm not going to trade at all. The costs are so high. Forget about it, right? I had this idea of continuity in my head. You know, you increase the cost a little bit, well, the trade will be a little bit less, or it might modify, but you can have a catastrophe on your hand that businesses just go completely to a non-trading mode. And so there's a substantial reduction in trade as a consequence, much more than you could ever predict. And so economic forecasting is especially hard because of this Knightian uncertainty. There's another lemma from this, from the social brain and everything that is related to it. And that is this governance. In order to overcome our boundedness, we need tools. We need institutions. I call them institutions, but it's a very broad term when how I use it. It is shaking hands, it's culture, it's language, It's everything that we use to overcome these bounds of interacting with each other. And as a consequence, we are embedded in this common system of institutions. And I also call that governance. Our interactions are completely governed as such by these guides, by these institutions. And these institutions exist because we are so bounded, so limited in our abilities. So we use the English language to communicate with each other. That is governance, because certain things require certain ways to express ourselves. The English language imposes on us a way of thinking. If you use another language, you start to think differently. You become a different person, in other words, because you are conditioned by the language. The same holds for being from a Western country like the UK versus being from a country in Africa or a country in Asia, where you have different culture. Culture is a guide again in our behavior. It guides how we interact with each other and how we think about the world. Very important to realize that. In a global economy, you try to overcome that and say we need to be an open society, we need to be diversified society, you need to push away your limitations, you need to push away your inability to communicate with each other, so to say, yeah? In a clairvoyant way, so to say. Yeah. Okay, so then there is very closely related to that, there's this embeddedness. The embeddedness is that we as human beings are completely embedded in this governance system. We are completely embedded in the governance. And it takes many, many years from being born up till the age of 20 nowadays here in the Western society to be completely embedded. You learn things and you accept the institutions and the ways that we do things, and then we become embedded, so to say. Now, very closely related to the embeddedness is, when I talked about money, is trust. There's a dual relationship between this embeddedness and trust. So they are the same coin, in other words. Embeddedness is one side of the coin, trust is the other side of the coin, so to say. Yeah. So embeddedness can not be separated from trust in some sense, and trust cannot be separated from embeddedness. Yeah. When I go into a shop and I buy something, I really am fully embedded, and I believe that the other person is also fully embedded. We use the same money, we use the same rituals, we use the same language. And that is what I mean with this duality. Another expression would be, I trust completely this shop owner to understand me and to satisfy the same institutions that I do. Yeah. So trust and embeddedness are the same things, in other words. Then, a completely different consequence of still the same hypothesis, namely hypothesis number one, is that if we want to change things, so far I did not talk about change, I did not talk about changing institutions. I only said there are institutions and we're fully embedded. This is a very passive, a very negative kind of thing. When you're embedded in this straitjacket of institutions, well, we as human beings are fighting straitjackets and we want to change things. So this is called the entrepreneurial function. Again, I'm expressing myself here in economic terms, not in sociological terms or in terms of biology or something. This is an economic thing. The economic thing is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is the drive, the purpose to change things. I want to create a new market, and I do that by creating a new commodity. I change the institutions of the economy as a consequence. And there are unintended consequences as well, right? When Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone in 2007, he would probably not have predicted then that 10 years later, it would be completely dominating the whole world, right? We are now completely embedded in a world with smartphones. Yeah? So, and the first smartphone was the iPhone of Apple in 2007. Now, in a very, very short amount of time, it became a global phenomenon, and the whole global economy is now geared towards that tiny little tool in your pocket. Yeah. All right. Any questions? Let me conclude this very first part of today's first lecture, and then we take a small break with a quote from Herbert Simon from this paper that I uploaded, who expresses this. A note, this was written in 1991, that is already 30 years ago. This was the world before the smartphone, before platforms, before everything changed so much. But already he was able to give a very good, powerful expression to all of this that I talked about. Anyway, read it. We have a short break. Thomas Bell has a question, yeah? You can turn on your microphone if you want.
Hi, can you hear me there okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I just had a question maybe in regards to the entrepreneurial function and sort of how you're sort of building this into the sort of theory that we're talking about. Is that just people's sort of desire or want to change institutions, and then obviously accept the wide definition of institutions being, you know, cultures and handshakes and whatnot, just general rules that we sort of conduct our lives by. But I wanted to maybe pick up on how we communicate with each other as well. If you're aware of Elon Musk has like a Neuralink he's trying to create, maybe to allow humans to communicate a lot more effectively than, you know, our preconceived ideas of, you know, language and culture, whatnot as well. I wondered if those two are in any way linked, and whether in the future, if that was something that came to fruition, would we be able to have a higher entrepreneurial function if we had sort of much more efficient way of communicating?
This is exactly what I talk about. Yes, this is a wonderful example. Elon Musk is a very good example of that. Steve Jobs is a good example, right? Steve Jobs was driven by making a profit. He created a new machine, iPhone, because he wanted to tie down Apple's customers to the iStore mainly, iTunes. That was his motivation. And it became this humongous thing, completely unforeseen. This is how things are done by individuals. But there's also something called collective entrepreneurship, that collectively, by very, very small changes, you slowly over time, you create a brand new way of doing things. This happens this happens all the time in society. So, for example, capitalism itself came about after Black Death in the 14th century. Over multiple centuries, very, very slowly, the world evolved. And it was like Black Death had a shock to the economy. It gave a shock to society. It was a major shock, of course. But at first, not much changed. But over time, if you look how it evolved over the centuries, there were major, major, major changes. And this is an accumulation of very small things, and normal people doing normal, small things differently. Some person deciding not to be a serf on the manor of the Lord, but go to the city to make a living there. those changes accumulated, so to say, they can bring about major change. There are more targeted examples of that. We always equate entrepreneurship with individuals, but that is not necessarily the case. There is collective entrepreneurship as well. And it all comes down to changing our institutions. And the motivations for changing institutions is always that people feel unhappy of how things are going, how we are doing things, and they will fight it, and they will push, and they will try to make changes to it. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was really good. Thanks very much.
Okay. By the way, great example is again 6th of January in DC, the storming of Capitol as well. That is also, people are unhappy for whatever reason, and they revolt. It's again and again this motivation to stand up and to say we should do things differently. And those changes have unintended consequences, and these changes, yeah, how you say, accumulate and can bring about major innovations in the economy. Yeah. And maybe that will happen again in the coming years as well in the United States, in the political system or in the economy. Let's have a small break, have a sip of water, and then I will come back. Let's say take a 3-minute break to calm down a bit, or take a sip of water. All right, let's go to the second hypothesis. What I want to do is build it up, so to say. So hypothesis 1 was the most basic one. That was the social brain, essentially, the most fundamental idea for human society building and sociality, as it is also called. Now, this has to be expressed somehow. So we need to link this society building, this networking, to economics in some sense. And what is economics about? It's about creating economic wealth. And we need another basic hypothesis to link human beings to the creation of wealth. And how do we do that? Well, we make a caricature of a human being called an economic agent, and we hang on that economic agent abilities. And there are two elements there, namely productive abilities and consumptive needs. So those are the most basic economic elements. And so we now link the social networking ability of the human being with the other main thing, namely this productiveness, this productivity. And also the desire, of course, consumptive needs. Those are also very important. So we now make the economic agent an abstract model of a human being making economic decisions, socioeconomic decisions in particular, including networking decisions, and of course also decisions to produce certain things and to consume certain things. So all these things come together in an economic agent in the environment that I'm setting out here. Now, hypothesis 1 allows us to go very far into this. We can completely individualize, so to say, all these things. We can say, oh yeah, all these networks, all of that stuff is really based on individual, completely individualistic decision making. So networking can be reduced to individualistic decision making, individual decisions, production decisions, consumption decisions, all of it. So you negate in some sense all these institutions, you throw them away and you reduce everything to just these individualistic decisions. Now, this is called methodological individualism. So this is taking that hypothesis to all the way. And that is exactly what has been done in economics. In economics, the marginalist revolution really imposed on us this methodological individualism and reduced everything to individuals. And we now operate in an economics that is so individualized that we have no theories about what collectives of human beings are doing. We're not able to do that. We have no instruments to properly describe that, to properly understand that. So methodological individualism has completely hollowed out our science as a consequence, our art of economics. Okay, so hypothesis 2 is essentially is the first step into the direction of what it is, what that is, this productive ability and this consumptive ability. Let's first talk about production. I already mentioned this. Productive abilities are subject to increasing returns to specialization. So this is a very basic human ability that nowadays is translated in the ability of social organizations. So firms are specialized in the production of certain goods. And this specialization is highly productive. We had experiments with firms that were producing everything, especially in the 1970s. This was the ideal viewpoint of the ideal firm, was a firm that was humongous and did everything. This essentially failed in the 1970s. So one of the failures of that decade, the decade of stagflation, is that these humongous conglomerates, as we call them, failed. And so you got a retreat from the idea that we can do everything and that we are very good at doing everything. Yeah? It is all deeply founded on our own human abilities to produce, and that those human abilities to produce are subject to increasing returns to specialization. And what I mean with that is that we can learn tasks and that we become much better at tasks. And I'm not meaning here that you can become a concert pianist at the highest level if you exercise enough. No, I'm not meaning that. I'm meaning that you can decently play the piano if you exercise enough, right? So it is an ability to do a task quite well, maybe not perfect. Yeah? For that, you need talent. And that talent, I will come back to that a little bit later. Talent derails this idea of the increasing returns to specialization, because you can say, oh, it's all based on talent. But that is not what is meant here. What is meant here that everybody, every able human being is subject to this properties, subject to this ability, the ability to become better and better by learning to do a certain task. So I become better at farming when I become a farmer, and I spend 100% of my productive time doing farming. Yeah, that's the idea. And we build societies on that, because this is from the very first moment that humanity evolved and emerged. It was this ability to become more productive and to increase our production in this way that we started to dominate the world. And this happened around 70,000 years ago. Yeah? So 70,000 years ago, there was a moment in human evolution, the cognitive revolution, as it is called, or the cognitive moment in the evolution of a human species. That is when Homo sapiens emerged. They really went all the way with the social division of labor. All right, very closely related then is a hypothesis about the consumptive abilities of a human being, and that is the hypothesis that it is subject to consumptive smoothing. And this translates at the social level to the idea that there are gains from trade, mutual gains from trade. And that should be familiar from your past modules in microeconomics. Mutual gains from trade refers to the fact that if I have apples and some other person has potatoes, when we exchange commodities, I exchange apples for potatoes, and the other person obtains apples from me by selling, so to say, potatoes to me, that we both become better off. Now, both becoming better off is founded on the fact that the underlying hypothesis is that of consumptive smoothing. We like mixed bundles of goods. We like everything. We like food, shelter, good healthcare, good entertainment, luxury goods, all of these things we like. And we like a lot of things. We really like to have a nice set of things around us. We are hoarders of stuff, right? And so this is a very deep human thing. And our trading system is completely based on that. To give you an example, I can have increasing returns to specialization by becoming a potato farmer. I become very good at growing potatoes. I can have an enormous harvest of that. If I only would like potatoes and nothing else, I would become a potato farmer and would not bother. I would be a hermit with a potato farm. And I would not trade with anybody. There's no need to trade because I don't need anything else besides potatoes. It is our desires to have more that I will engage with others to get the other stuff. So that gives us the reason why we have actually a community, a society. Yeah. And that is hypothesis 5. We need a final hypothesis to wrap it all up. Here are the 4 hypotheses coming together, so to say, right? So our networking abilities, our increasing returns to specialization, and our consumptive smoothing, the trade, the gains from trade, come all together, are wrapped up in a nice little package, and that package is called society or economy, to be more precise, right? Our economy is a social organization in which we are pursue all these different elements. We pursue ultimately the goal of all this is this consumptive smoothing, the use value, right? The use value from consuming all these wonderful goods. The production of all these wonderful goods are based on the increasing returns to specialization. And we are able to bring it all together because we are networkers. And so we are able to build trade networks. And those trade networks are guided by institutions. And all of this together forms therefore our economy. Our economy is putting it all together in one package, in one thing. Are there any questions? So let's talk about some consequences of this. The main consequence of this is that from all these hypotheses, we need all of them to go to the social division of labor. Because what Homo sapiens did 70,000 years ago was make this step to the social division of labor, to say we can all make it work for us. All of these elements come together for us in the social division of labor. That's what I want to communicate in this lecture, right? So we need all these hypotheses to make the social division of labor come about. And this leads then to some more specific consequences, namely, we need to know from each other what the heck we are doing. If I grow potatoes, it's no use to try to sell them, but nobody knows what a potato is. So we have to know what we are doing. What are these goods that we are trading? What is our productive ability? Can I trust you to produce good products, right? Is the quality of my potatoes good enough? If I have a bad field and it's always generating very small potatoes, a lot of them rotting away because the soil is bad or things like that, you know, that's not a great thing. We know from each other what that is. We know these abilities, we know the quality of the soil, we know the production standards, so to say. So there's a social recognition of all these things. There's a social recognition of the roles that we have in the social division of labor. And all of this requires public trade that happens in the open, so to say, that we know what is going on. We know the quality of the goods that are traded, right? And if we are made an offer for a certain good, we will reject it because it's not good enough, because we know there's another person with the expected quality, right? And that is part of our embeddedness. We know what goes on, and we compare, and we know what the price is also for trading in different instances. Yeah? And there's a certain publicness to it all, right? It is public information. Yeah. And that refers then to exchange mechanisms. This refers to the price mechanism, as we call that, right? So by using the price mechanism, we have the most grown-up way to communicate to each other how this works, how these institutions function in our society and bring us this wealth. Let's do an example. I will create now an example. Last time I used an extremely small tribe of 4 persons only, in which I already did this computation. I will go to a little bit more complex tribe. Tribe is a little bit bigger, and so there are more gains from trade, so to say, in that tribe. Yeah, and I will not talk about so much the institutions. Last time I said, okay, let's compare for this simplistic little tribe of so few people. Let's compare institutions, and I had very much an emphasis on institutions. Here I want to put the emphasis on the social division of labor. I want to see what the gains are, so to say. How do we measure that? How can we use a tool to measure the use value that is created in our society, in our tribe, and measure that? Yeah. So let's set up this this simple tribe. There are 2 goods, food and housing. I will use also letters for that in the mathematical formulation. So an X for food and a Y for housing. Now, food is one category. It's not meat, vegetables. No, it is just food. And I assume that the role that is assigned to that is that of a hunter-gatherer. So a person hunts and gathers at the same time. So there's no farming in this simple society. I could also have said, oh, this is a farmer. But I assume here, this is extremely simplistic society still, and we just have hunter-gatherers. The other specialization is builder. A builder builds dwellings, huts, housing, so to say. And both specializations are the only things that we we will consider besides autarky. Now, autarky is always a fallback position. That is the Robinson Crusoe economy. Robinson Crusoe adrift and then landing on a little island and then saying, okay, here I try to build a small economy just by myself. And of course, that is a very ineffective, inefficient economy. It's very low productivity because it does not tap into the increasing returns of specialization, of course, because you have to do everything. Yeah. Now, on the other side, then the consumption of all these goods is that we have consumptive smoothing, and both food and housing are what people want. Now we're going to formalize that, right? So we need to do two things. We need increasing returns to specialization expressed in mathematics, and we need consumptive smoothing expressed in mathematics. Now for increasing returns to specialization, this is quite simple. We use production vectors, and for each specialization, we introduce a specific production vector. Consumptive smoothing is based on convex preferences. Yeah, and I assume that you know your basic preference theory, so I will not explain convex preferences. I refer also to the mathematical tutorials that I have posted for discussing these kind of properties. So on the production side, what do we have? We have three roles, remember: hunter-gatherer, builder, and autarkic person. A hunter-gatherer specializes completely in food production. We assume that there are 6 units of food produced by this individual. A builder can produce 18 units of housing, and an autarkic person has much lower overall productivity because he's not specialized. We assume that an autarkic person produces 2 units of food and 6 units of housing. I leave in the middle what those units are. It's not important, right? Whether that is bushels or pounds or huts or bricks, you know, it doesn't matter. What about the consumptive side? I now assume that there's a social understanding, there's a collective understanding of use value. In the tribe, there's a common feeling about these goods. And this is expressed then in one particular utility function. So another way to say it is we assume that everybody has the same utility function. And I'm referring then to this subjective idea of use value, a subjective idea of utility, that everybody has their own individual utility. This is in reality not true. In reality, utility is very much social. And again, we find that in the economy. When we do experiments, for example, economic experiments with people in a lab, we find that they have a common understanding for certain goods, you know. So here we make that explicit and we have a common social utility function, and that is this function here. This is of the type of Stone-Geary, as it is called. It is a modification of the Cobb-Douglas utility function, as you can see. It's computationally quite easy, and it satisfies all the basic hypotheses of what a utility function is supposed to satisfy, including this convexity. And this convexity refers to consumptive smoothing. Mixed bundles are better than fully specialized bundles, or even though fully specialized bundles still generate utility, right? And that is in particular here the case with the Stone-Geary utility function. Now we have a 1 added to the x and a 3 added to the y, as you can see here in this formulation. Now this the difference between this 1 and this 3 indicates that there is a social preference for X over Y. Food is more important than housing. Yeah. Let's start off with benchmark, and the benchmark is everybody is by himself, which is a silly benchmark because it was never reality. It was reality for certain individuals in certain times in history, that people said, I will live by myself as a hermit. There are examples all over the world where people were living separated from society, living by themselves, doing things by themselves. But as an organizational form, it has not been pursued very well, so to say. It has no use either. The closest we come is the feudal system in European Middle Ages, where people were peasants, essentially working the land, and there was very, very little trade. There still was a social system of transferring commodities that were produced, but at the lowest rank in society, the peasant was essentially using the produce of the land to survive, right? And there was a little bit of trade. So the surpluses were exchanged, for example, for cloth, for clothing in particular. So there was still a little bit of trade, even in those societies. Yeah. Anyway, as a theoretical benchmark, it's wonderful. We will just say, okay, this person will produce the autarkic bundle, and that is 2,6. This person will therefore also consume exactly that bundle, and we can therefore compute the corresponding utility level, which is the benchmark utility level, which is then 27. Yeah, is that clear what we did here? It's just a theoretical benchmark because I want to know what the gains are from a social division of labor. I want to express that. And how I can do that? Well, by looking at the benchmark, even when it is just a theoretical, silly benchmark. Okay, now I'm going to compute an optimal social division of labor, right? So let's say in our tribe, a certain fraction of economic agents is specializing as hunter-gatherers, and we express that then as a lambda. Lambda is a number between 0 and 1, expressing the fraction of hunter-gatherers in our society. 1 minus lambda, therefore, is the fraction of people that specialize as builders. So what is then the average output in this society when we have this lambda fixed? Well, that is then a computation in which we mix the output of a hunter-gatherer with the output of a builder according to the weight lambda. So here we are. We have y lambda being an expression of this wealth that is created in this mixed society. So the utility in this society, plugging this into the given social utility function, gives us then this utility, this level of happiness. This becomes a function of lambda, as you can see. And we can call that function U, capital U of lambda. And then we can optimize this lambda. We can optimize the use value that is generated here. Yeah. And we do that then. It is just maximizing this U of lambda over the lambda. And then I get my optimal social division of labor. We use standard optimization theory for this. And that means we use a first order condition and a second order condition. Well, when you look at the function that we had, this U lambda, you see that it is a quadratic function. And in fact, it is a negative weight on the lambda square. And that means we have a reversed curve, and that means there is a maximum. So second order condition does not have to be checked. This is so we only do the first order condition as a consequence. Now take the derivative of this function with regard to lambda, and we then see that I use the product rule and the chain rule, and we get then this derivative 6 times the second term, it is 21 minus 18 lambda, and then the derivative of the second term minus 18 times the first term, that is 6 lambda plus 1. And when I compute all of this, I get 108 minus 216 lambda. That I equate to 0, and I get then that this lambda is half. When you take the second order derivative, by the way, you get negative 216. It is indeed a maximum. We don't have to go further than that. It's very easy to see that. Yeah. Are there any questions about this? Okay. Just technicalities essentially. Let's compute then that optimum. What is that then? We plug in lambda is a half. What is then our average output? Well, it is 3.9, namely 6 units from per hunter-gatherer, 18 units of housing per builder. Half of the population was a hunter-gatherer, half population was builder. So we get half times 6 and half times 18 as 3 and 9 as an output. We plug that back into the utility function, and I compute that it is 48. And you see here tremendous gains from trade, humongous gains from trade actually. This is much, much larger than the utility or the use value that we got under autarky. Yeah. Okay, so this concludes then this lecture. Are there any questions with regard to this lecture? So to wrap up, we have seen the hypotheses that are necessary to come to the social division of labor. And then I did a computational example that brings all of these elements together. Note that in all these computational examples, the one element that is never there, and it is the most difficult element, is the networking element, of course. We assume simply that these people can trade with each other and that they can achieve these mixed bundles somehow. Yeah? And we did not talk about that mechanism in this computational example at all. We just computed the optimum output. This also brings me then to an announcement. I have uploaded yesterday to Canvas an exercise set. And this exercise set is exactly of this type, computing the optimal social division of labor and computing some other examples as well, which refers to the next lecture, which is what we will talk about after a short break. Any questions? By the way, there's also an answer key uploaded. So 2 files, one is the assignments or the exercises, and the other is model answers. Yeah. Okay, so what I propose then is we have a break and a little bit longer. So I would suggest we get together again 25 after the hour. That's a 7-minute break. It allows me to set up this second lecture. Okay, see you in 7 minutes then.